Here we have a Wertheim pattern cam sewing machine that I acquired on an auction site some time ago. Not had a chance to get it going until now. As you can see at the top of the machine, that's where your pattern cams go in. At the moment I'm just setting up to winding a bobbin up, and I've got my thread going through this thread guide. I had to thread it through this little guide here, brought it back to the bobbin, and you simply slide it across to here, and the foot pedal came with this machine here, which is down there. And as it says on my instructions about it, it's a vintage sewing machine, a Wertheim. It came with a Rapida dual voltage motor, and I had to be careful to switch it because when I got the machine it was set for 110 volts. So if you do happen to get one of these, make sure you switch your motor, if it has got one, to the correct voltage. The Wertheim pattern cam sewing machine also came with cams. There were 12 cams in all, some of them producing quite a wavy stitch, others like more of a pointed, some of them more like a satin stitch, and the others like a sawtooth, also a step pattern, a very open binding pattern, another pattern here, close pattern, and here another sawtooth pattern, and here we are, more of a satin stitch and arrowhead pattern, and a nice pattern here with blocks. Now the machine has a number of controls on the side. There's one here and also another one here, which seems to be related to the stitch characteristics. I shall have a look and see what I can find on the net about how it works. Basically, a lot of these machines you can disengage the actual needle, usually by twisting this control at the end of the machine. And it also had quite an unusual, this is where your bobbin goes into, your bobbin case there, but it looks fairly straightforward how it's wound on, and the whole mechanism clips in down at this part of the machine, and the needle plate which I got with it, it slides in. The first thing I noticed was when it was slid in, the best thing to do with the machine would be to make sure that it's engaged, obviously, within these two metal bars. And you could, if you want to, run a little bit of tape along there just to secure it. But it all looks quite straightforward. I obviously put a new needle on it when I tested the timing on the machine, and the timing looked fine. A very quiet motor on the Wertheim. Winding the bobbin on. As you can see, it's a very quiet motor. I would recommend using a magnifying glass to thread the needle on these vintage machines. Basically what I do is, if you look at the more powerful side of this magnifying glass, you'll find that the actual hole in the needle goes from in this direction, i.e. straight through where the magnifying glass is. That's where the hole in the needle is, and that's the only way I can really see where to thread. Sometimes I find it best to just cut the thread at the end and make it sharp. Sometimes I'll wet the thread, just pop it in some water to wet it, and then it'll thread through more easily. The thread guides on this machine look fairly straightforward. You can put a bobbin on a bit of rubber tubing to secure it if it's wide enough. If it's more narrow, like this 100-meter thread, that's fine. You actually have to thread it through the guide here. It comes under, when you do thread it, comes under the stitch tensioner here. Okay, if I show you that, it comes under there, and you'll know it's on the right side. You'll see that you'll be able to pull this bar up here, and then dial on here, that sets the tension at the top. On this particular machine, you're going to have to thread it through this stitch lever here, okay, and then it's quite straightforward. It comes down various guides, and basically you just have to wind it round and in and round and in these guides here, as you can see. And there's another guide right underneath there, the same thing here, just there, okay, and then you're having to put it through the needle, and then it goes through a gap under the presser foot and back. On this machine, with your bobbin case wound, I've got the bobbin here with the thread coming off the bobbin clockwise, as you can see. The actual case it goes into, you can see between my thumb and first finger that there is a gap there. That gap, basically you put the bobbin into the bobbin case, okay, and then you've got to put your thread into the gap, and it'll feed down against the side of this spring, and the spring on the side there has got two screws, and basically the first one that you come to is the tensioner, and that's the idea, is that's how you can set the tension on your bobbin. And depending on what type of stitching you're doing, if you're using lots of pattern cams, the general idea is to have the top tension here set not too much. I'll try this on say 2, see how it feeds, and then I'll have a look at these actual controls here and see what I can get from the pattern cams I've got. The machine seems to run very smoothly, the timing's fine. I love this work on the bobbin casing here, and the timing mechanisms here. I did oil and clean this machine when I got it. It didn't come with a case, but it did come with some screws, and also at the back of the machine it did come with some original fixtures that would have fitted inside its actual case. And here you can see the actual motor at the back of the machine as well. So it came with a nice electric motor, and it's got the belt there that operates at the back of the machine. So all's the bobbin case fits into this part of the machine here. It fits quite snugly at this angle here, which looks, if you go by the clock being 6 o'clock being vertically downwards, it sort of looks at the angle as being sort of about 8 o'clock there, and there's like a sprung mechanism that clips onto it here. There you go, and it clips away. To release it, there's a little lever there, and you basically just press it like that, and it'll spring out. So I can then put that back in again, just to show you how that works in putting your bobbin case in once. I find myself having to wear my reading glasses to thread the machine. As you can actually see here, I've just got the thread through, and once it's through, the idea is you can use one of your fingers just to tease it properly through, and then you're on your way. And I've actually fed it from the top of these particular rods on the machine, and it's feeding off. It'll be feeding off this way around, which is anti-clockwise, okay? And it goes down through. I threaded it through here, and it's got to go between the bars, between these metal bars of the tensioner. So I've fed it through, going vertically down, around, and this is the little springy mechanism here which controls the thread tension to the lever, and basically it's a question of then feeding it around these thread guides. There's 2 there, one underneath there, which is there, and then it goes through that way from front to back, and then it'll have to go between the gap and the presser foot here underneath, and then out and down. Once you've picked up your thread by turning the handle at the back of the machine, I basically turned this handle by hand, and it goes into the bobbin case, and with the correct timing it'll pick it up as a loop, and then I'll just have to use a pair of scissors and get between that little loop there, okay, and draw the thread up. Sometimes you can have a bit of problem, making sure, you have to make sure that the thread inside your bobbin case is loose and free and dangling down to be picked up by the needle as it goes in on the mechanism. Once you've got the bobbin case clipped into this machine, there is a release spring here I found this a little bit troublesome. I had to actually go to the lever arch at the back by my finger there and just click that forward, click it into place. You draw your bobbin thread up, and at the moment I'm just sewing. As you can see, there's a straight stitch there, and I'll be trying some pattern. Once you've got your pattern cams put into the machine, you'll find that on a Wertheim, also otherwise known as a Rapida, which came from its association with Spain, that they screw in. There's this metal circle here which comes out. I'll show you. Okay, and the pattern cam goes in this way. This one here is got a zigzag with a straight, and it's quite. You've got to make sure you've got the correct plate in underneath, because this other plate obviously is not for patterns. You can see that little hole in front of where it's been punched out with those 3 lines there for the feeder dogs to come, is not for pattern cams. The one which is underneath this plate is. So basically the pattern cam itself, it lifts off, and this is the part of the pattern cam which goes at the top where it says the pattern is, and there's a little tiny little slot there in it which fits over a pin. Okay, once that's fitted in, you then get your little circle here, metal circle here, screw that down. There you go. Okay, now in order to work pattern cams with this machine, I found in order to make this black pin here, as you can see there's a metal pin there engaged with the pattern cam, I had to slide this lever right over, okay, which will really make the needle. At the moment the needle's going towards the far side here, in this gap on the foot. Okay, I've got the needle position, the middle needle position set in the middle. I think that's probably needle position. These machines can run twin needles, you see, they're quite complicated. And because I'm running a pattern cam, I've got the stitch length, which I believe is to do with stitch length, set between 0 and 1, and you turn that dial in there, turn it round. Okay, so that's set. Okay. Make sure when you feed the bobbin, which is here, okay, so facing me, the thread will be coming as if it was coming clockwise off the bobbin. It goes into that groove which is between my fingers there, then it goes down, but you must feed it through this little groove. Can you see where my thumb is? There's a little groove on the side there, and it'll be caught underneath the spring which is between my finger and first finger there, and there's a little screw there. That's the tensioning on the bobbin. Okay, that puts tension on the bobbin thread. Then when to put it into the casing, I found this to be a bit tricky. The way I got it correct was I realised that you need to turn the machine by hand until you can see that the needle, if I pull this needle thread out, until you can see that at the top there the needle is about to go into the case. Okay, there at this point in the machine the needle is about to go in the case, and I realised that looking at this bobbin case here, that gap at the top there, okay, that's where the needle has to fit in to pick up the bobbin thread, and that's how I worked out how to fit the casing in, because it goes in this way but that way up, okay, at that particular cycle in the machine. And that's how I got it correct. And then you basically, this spring-loaded mechanism has to be sprung back. I found I had to push the actual lever underneath. I had to look at the side here, and you see there's a lever there, and I had to push the actual lever underneath from this side to make it spring back, and it clips back onto the bobbin case. And then if it's loaded up correctly, then of course it'll take up the bobbin thread and then do a few stitches by hand. Okay, so we'll try a new pattern cam. This one's got sort of satin stitch circlets, and I've threaded up my needle and bobbin in the case. The pattern cam goes in here, and you can see that it'll fit over that circle there, and that little groove in the grey groove got to fit over that pin. And then I'll have to move this lever right the way across and make sure that it engages. That's this first lever here. I'll move it right across after I put the pattern cam in. This, I believe, is actual needle position. I've set this in the middle, and I've set this close to 0 here. That'll be stitch length. Okay. This lever here seems to be related to, these are for controlling the feeder dogs. So basically, if I turn this lever here, it drops the feeder. You can see them dropping down. Okay. If I turn it back up again, you can see the feeder dogs going up. So you can set the feeder dogs at the correct height, maybe just flush, okay, like so. Okay, this lever here seems to be related to whether it's going forward or reverse. Okay, and once you've set it, you need to unscrew. So if I unscrew this, I can move it, okay, to a certain extent, and then, but don't have it too tight. And the idea is, without any thread on it, look to see that your feeder dogs, okay, are actually shifting along properly. Okay, so this is what I do with machines. That the instructions for this machine were in Spanish. I never found the full lot, but it seems to be similar in some ways to a necky. Okay, now they seem to be feeding nicely. So without the machine being threaded up, see whether it feeds material through. A little hole at the front of this mechanism for putting your bobbin in, and I realised that once I got my bobbin thread through this gap there and along underneath the spring, I didn't know what to do with the thread. Then I realised it has this little hole here, so I've fed the thread through the little hole, and then when I get the mechanism at the correct timing, when I move the needle plate back, I'll put this in the correct place so that this little gap here at the top will be where the needle would go in to pick it up, and we'll see if that. With the machine set on a pattern cam, in this case it was an arrowhead, I found by reducing the tension here down to around about 1 on the upper thread, using an arrowhead pattern cam in the Wertheim Rapida, I found that by setting this bar on 5, using a double layer of felt and slightly raising turning this bar to raise the feeder dogs up so we're slightly above the needle plate level. Also, it's very critical how you set this bar here. You need to have this dial slightly loose, but it needs to be as close to 0 as you can get it, okay, to force this machine into a satin stitch. Then suddenly, as you can see here, you're actually getting what you want, which is some arrowheads. Can you see them? And that is a proper pattern stitch with a vintage sewing machine. The thread tension is critical, and I set the thread tension on this machine to about number 2, and I'm feeding off this thread here, which is cotton. It's not embroidery thread, although manufacturers recommend embroidery thread. So with the feeder dog slightly raised flush of the needle plate, the thread tension not too tight, especially looser at the top than on the bobbin thread, then you're starting to get pattern stitches. This could be used to good effect in patterns that you can embellish your projects with. And the other thing that's critical is with your foot pedal on the Wertheim, or Rapida as they're sometimes called, because the factories were in Spain as well, you've got to have a steady speed to feed it through. So basically then you're getting your arrowheads bar position, which I think this control is. I set this to the middle. I'm setting this to number 5. The pattern cam's in there, in nice and tight. Feeder dogs, as I say, slightly raised flush above the needle plate, just ever so slightly, and they should be feeding through as small as possible in between each stitch. Okay, and like I said to you, when you put the thread on these vintage sewing machines, make sure it goes through the little eyelet which is on the bobbin holder before you put it in, and you must put the bobbin holder in. I wait till the needle's just about to go down. In fact, I let the needle go down slightly, and I can see where it's going to go, and so I line up the gap from the bobbin thing with where the needle's going to go in, and then it'll feed and pick up the hook so you can stitch the machine properly. All of these vintage machines have their foibles, and for me, to get one going I love it. It's absolutely magical. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I'll show you around some of the things I've made, some of them also with the Wertheim, and they were using simple zigzags. Here I show you some of the gift bags made using the Wertheim machine, otherwise known as the Rapida. And basically you can make things like this octopus here. He's got a simple zigzag stitch with a satin stitch, which you can get by basically it's a very close zigzag stitch where you're getting a satin stitch around it and you're cutting the pattern out. There's a sewn button on there, and basically a piece of ribbon, you can use that as decorative, fixing with a straight stitch. Inside the gift bag it's a zigzag stitch, and at the back of the gift bag you can use a zigzag stitch here. This is just fleece. Okay, when you sew the gift bag, basically it's two pieces of fleece, as you can see there's a stitching there, and you stitch it inside out first, turn it inside out to get this side which you can work on. But always put your patterns on first. So this octopus is cut out, and then his zigzags are put on him, and his buttons sewn on him, and folded over at the top, and you're putting some zigzags along there. And drawstrings, you need 2 strings, so you're going to need to have a safety pin, and basically your drawstring material, you put one through from the left all the way around, and then through the back, through the back, that's the back of the material through there, and then hold it there, and then feed another one the other way around, all the way around that way and back, and then you basically just tie knots at each end, and then you've got these drawstrings. Okay, that's the octopus. The next one, you've got an anchor with a fish. That's where PVA glue comes in handy. With the anchor, you don't have to glue the anchor here. You could just use a satin stitch here, which as you can see, it's a very close zigzag, this one here, rather than a satin. Very close. These are glued on with PVA glue. The tropical fish, the bubbles, little sequins, and there's the wavelets there, and a pattern cams there make these wavy stitch marks on the waves. Again, well, in this one I've used red for the drawstring bags, and inside there you can see I've used it's just a straight stitch basically there. Okay, seahorse is like almost a step pattern cam here. Again, I've put a little jewel die. That's obviously from a stud machine, and his eelgrass, which he lives amongst, is basically a simple pattern cam there, like a sawtooth pattern cam, quite open. I didn't force that one into total satin stitches. The same with the seahorse. It's like a sort of an alternating zigzag, which is one of the pattern cams that you get, and the little straight stitches around him on his fin there. Okay, that's a seahorse. Next one we've got is a bat. Okay, a nice basic shape in black for my bat. 2 little beads were sewn in for his eyes, 2 red beads. Got your crescent moon there, and just a red zigzag. And I like the contrast of the colour red on the gift bag there. So that's a bat gift bag, again made with the vintage Wertheim. Seahorses. These were made from quite soft fleece onto purple fleece. A nice sort of open zigzag pattern there, almost like an overlock really. And the seahorse is cut out, and you've got this very small straight stitch, and the Wertheim's fantastic for these tiny little straight stitches. And again, I'm using an arrowhead here, but it's quite an open arrowhead, as you can see, for pattern stitches on the 2 seahorses. The red eye and a green eye, and it's quite a small bag. Okay. For another nautical theme, you've got your octopus again, which is a classic octopus shape. He hasn't got the 8 legs, but it's only 2D. Green eyes. Okay, and there's your diver's helmet there. Press studs there used from the stud machine, and there's your, it's a typical, there's a big diver's helmet there with a which will have an airline coming down to it. Okay, and again I'm using another pattern cam stitch here along the bottom here to give it a sort of a nautical theme. And the last one I'll show you here is ship's anchor. This has been cut out of old recycled denim, quite raggy on the edges, but that's what denim's like. You've got a satin stitch in yellow going up along to delineate the anchor, and using again the yellow thread along the top. On the back of it I thought I'd go and I put a very simple, very close zigzag in, almost satin stitched it there and along the top there, and again it's a drawstring bag, all made basically for pleasure, just to be given away.